pretty much all of my regular listeners are going to know who you are. Okay, you're primarily a broker-dealer is what people know you for, and an author. But for someone who just, stumbled upon this show, could you just give a brief introduction to who you are and what you do?
Well, sure. I mean, predominantly I am in the investment management business. I have a U.S.-based broker-dealer, also a Canadian broker-dealer, an asset management company, and an offshore bank. And through those various entities, I provide our clients with financial services. So brokerage accounts, separately managed accounts, mutual funds, bank accounts, precious metals. And, I'm generally trying to help people invest in an environment of depreciating fiat currencies, particularly the U.S. dollar is my main concern, that we're going to have a dollar crisis, and people need to do whatever they can to protect their wealth from that crisis, which means getting out of U.S. dollars, accessing foreign markets, accessing precious metals, and holding assets that will retain their value, their real purchasing power.
Okay, and I'd love to talk about that a little bit later, but I also want to mention that you're also an author. You've authored 6 books, I believe, and at least one of them has been a bestseller.
Well, I think many of them have been bestsellers. A couple of them hit the New York Times list. But, they don't sell. They're nonfiction books, rather, about investment, so they're not, selling like, fiction books would. But they sold pretty well for the types of books that they are, being about the investments or about the economy. So they've all done pretty well. The most recent one is The Real Crash, which did hit the New York Times bestseller list. The Real Crash, Americans Coming Bankruptcy. But I think my best-selling book was still my first book, which was Crash Proof, How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse, because it was so well-timed in that it came out about a year before the 2008 financial crisis. So the book was still selling, and then when the financial crisis hit, then it was the only book that was kind of out there that really was dealing with the topic, and so it really took off.
Yeah, so you essentially got 2 rounds of publicity off that one book.
Yeah, in fact, it sold more copies in '08 than it did in '07. It came out in February of '07, but it kind of got a new lease on life when the financial crisis hit.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about your career, because like I said, I have been watching you for a while, is you're also famous for a set of YouTube videos that some admirer of yours made called Peter Schiff Was Right.
Yeah, that initial YouTube video, which there's copies of it now, but the original one was taken down. I don't know why. Maybe I think the guy's channel was shut off or something. But somebody put together kind of a 10-minute collage of some of my segments, mostly from Fox News, but one from CNBC. And, before it got taken down, it had over 2 million views. And most of the views, happened in the first few weeks that it was up. It got to 1 million views very quickly. And so that kind of helped spread my name, because there are a lot of people that maybe hadn't heard about me, and then they heard about me because they saw the YouTube video. So they didn't necessarily see or even remember the original television appearances, but they saw that compilation, at a time, and so then they went and did a little research on me. Maybe they read my book, or they, subscribed to a newsletter. So it did help me in that it helped spread the word about me, because the mainstream media certainly wasn't doing it. It's not like they were really coming out and, hey, congratulations, Peter, you really nailed this thing, you really called it. So it was good that other people were pointing out what the mainstream was trying to ignore.
Right. In fact, everyone was ignoring you or denying it. I remember the only one who maybe came out and said something was Ben Stein, correct? The economist and actor.
Well, he was one of the guys who was making fun of me in that Peter Schiff Was Right video, who later came back and said, God, the guy was right. I should have listened to him.
Yeah, that was big.
So a lot of guys just refused to apologize, or some of the guys refused to admit that they were wrong, even though they were so obviously wrong.
Yeah, right. And so I guess that's the business. And,
guys like Art Laffer, So.
Right. And I think in one particular case, this is just one of my own notes, I recall you debating someone on CNN or something like that several times, actually. He was a little bit of an obnoxious guy. But not long after that, he came out with his own crash book. And so it's almost as if right after he debated you, because he was the bull and you were the bear, and it seemed like almost right after that he went home and started this book on the crashes coming. It's quite funny. And just to round out your bio, you also ran for political office, right?
Yeah, just one time. Yeah, in 2010, I ran for Senate in Connecticut, and I never made it out of the primary. because I lost in the primary, so I didn't. I ran in the Republican process, but I didn't actually get to represent the Republican Party in the general election. Linda McMahon, outspent me 10-1, and so she, was able to win that race. And there was a third guy in the race too, who was a career politician. So I had a lot of competition. I still did pretty well. I did a lot better than what people expected. And and if I had been taken seriously by the media or by anybody, who knows? I might have even won the primary. I mean, who knows if I'd have been able to win the general election? But I think I could have run the primary if I was taken more seriously in the media.
And
but they basically ignored my whole candidacy.
Right. And the interesting thing is it was actually your supporters who gave you the idea to do this. Someone actually started a website.
Yeah, there were some people that drafted me and convinced me, and they raised some money, and so I ended up doing it. But yeah, it turned out to be really a waste of time and money.
That's interesting. Yeah, I would love to talk to you about that as well. So this is interesting. I want to go back basically to your university or before that, those times. And so my wife, she interviewed you once. I introduced you to her, and she's seen a lot of your videos. This is how fun it is to be married to me, Peter. You get to watch Peter Schiff videos, read Jeffrey Tucker books, and so on and so forth, and get quotes from Mises and Rothbard and stuff. So that's a lot of fun, I guess. But she's seen you many times, and she says, you know what, that Peter Schiff, you come across so genuine. And she says, I bet he was just exactly the same as a kid. And I probably tend to agree with her. Were you pretty much the same? Did you give your teachers trouble when they slipped up or said things that were wrong? Were you the kid who knew everything?
When it came to economics or history, stuff like that, social studies, I had a lot of arguments with my professors. I didn't argue with my math professors or my science professors or English professors, but anybody that had to do with U.S. history or economics, political science, those types of subjects, yes, I was
going back to high school and before though.
Argument.
How about in the fifth grade? Were you doing that back then?
Well, I don't think we had those subjects in the fifth grade, but whenever we had them, it started early. It definitely started early. I think I don't know if it was maybe it was junior high school, but yeah, because I grew up with my father, teaching me about the Constitution and Austrian economics when I was a young kid. So I was prepared. When I heard all this nonsense from professors, I immediately I didn't accept what they were saying. I was defending what I believed. So I argued my way through school.
Did this inoculation?
And it continued all the way up. It continued all the way up through college. Yeah, there's still. In fact, I'll run into people every once in a while that will remember me, even from being in a class with me in Berkeley or something, because I was the guy that was always arguing and talking. Even if there was like a huge lecture hall, people remember me because I was constantly arguing with the professor.
You studied was it economics and political science?
If I took those classes, yeah. But I also took, plenty of other classes in which I assumed the teachers knew what they were talking about because, I had no way to know otherwise. But at least, in certain subjects, when the teachers are basically wrong, I know enough to call them out on it. But,
Now, did this attitude affect your grades?
It does a little scary because, if the economics professors are so wrong, if the history professors are so wrong, it could be that the other professors are wrong about their topics too. I just don't know enough about the subject matter myself to know.
Right. And that's a good lesson to learn in life, actually, is that because a guy knows more than you doesn't mean he knows everything.
He doesn't even know more than me. Some of these professors, in the econ department, they think they know more, but they don't.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's true.
Or they didn't.
Yeah. So what I was going to ask is, did you pay a price on your grades for?
Sometimes I might have. I got good grades in general. But yeah, I might have got a B when I should have got an A.
Yeah.
I certainly sometimes when I had my tests, I would give them the answer that they wanted, and then I would put a little footnote and say, the answer that I wrote is the answer for the test, but this is just what I actually think, and I put that down So I was I basically let the professor know that I gave them the answer that he wants for my grade, but here's what I think the real answer is. But if I just put in the real answer, they might have, marked the question as wrong.
Yeah, right. That's funny.
I want to let him know that I know what his bullshit, his BS answer is, and I can regurgitate it, but then I can tell him what I really think. They probably didn't necessarily appreciate that, but you know.
I'm sure they didn't. I'm sure they didn't. I mean, all the times I've seen you on TV, thinking that you're going to get kicked off the set if the interview goes any longer. I could just imagine it must have been tough to stay in school sometimes, with these extended arguments and stuff. And so, so you mentioned that. So you graduated from UC Berkeley, and then you went to work as a stockbroker, correct?
Yeah, I mean, not immediately after graduating, but within a few years, that's what I was doing.
Oh, what did you do before that then?
Well, I was in commodities, so I was, so it wasn't stocks. I was trading options and futures, or helping people, trade them.
Oh, okay. Okay, so you were a commodities guy early on.
Yeah, I started off commodities and then went to stocks.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that was with Lehman Brothers, correct?
Shears and Lehman, yeah. Lehman Brothers was where I started doing stocks. And I wasn't there very long,
Okay, but that's when it gets interesting, right? So you decide you want to start your own brokerage firm.
Yeah, well, that was after I left Lehman. I mean, I wasn't as happy in that environment. I mean, I liked getting people into the stock market more so than commodities. It seemed like a more legitimate way for people to invest. I just didn't necessarily like the philosophy of the firm. It was more, churn 'em and burn 'em. It was more about making commissions for the firm, and sacrifice the client. Just keep getting new clients to replenish the ones that you lost because you overcharged them. So it was a mentality that really, to me, didn't seem very conducive to building good, lasting relationships. And so I didn't like the dynamic there. So I figured out, I left the industry for a while. And then I came back to it. So I was away for maybe a couple of years. And then I said, okay, let me go back to it. But I didn't go back and try to get a job at a firm because I was worried, it's just going to be more of the same. So I just wanted to be independent. And I went the route of an independent broker and ultimately started my own BD, broker-dealer, which, if I were to try to do that today, I never would even be able to because the regulatory costs are so much higher now than it was when I got started. So it would be something that wouldn't even be possible to do today. I mean, I'd have to go a different route.
Can we break this down for a minute here? Because it's kind of interesting from a timeline or career perspective. So you worked for a few years, basically in the markets, and then so you're, 27?
I don't even know if it was 2 years that I was working there, but it was over a year. But it was between 1 and 2 years. I was gone for a couple of years. So, I got back into it when I was maybe 28. I forget. By the time I got back into the business.
Okay.
And then I just started slowly. I was a one man operation working out of my apartment.
Were you working while you were off? While you were away from the market? Were you working or
not really? I mean, I had made some money, a little bit of money, so I was traveling for 6 months in Europe, and then I was in New York, and I was helping my dad out a little bit. But I wasn't really working. I was kind of I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. But then I was getting older, and I was like, okay, look, I got to do something here. Or maybe I was even closer to 30, I forget. But I was like, look, I got to figure out what I'm going to do because I really wasn't going anywhere. I really didn't have a career. I didn't have a job. I didn't know. So I kind of got back into it, and I just started working out of my apartment, just cold calling, opening up accounts, just making some recommendations. And then it just kind of built up from there.
So so I've heard you talk about this before.
Yeah,
you're basically living in your 1 bedroom or studio apartment in LA.
Yeah, I had a 1 bedroom at the time, and then eventually I moved into an office and I rented some space and hired some people, and then I grew the office, hired more people, and built it up. But and during the way, in the earlier part of my career, I was confronted with the .com bubble, which to me was crazy, and so I was, having a tough time telling people not to buy the internet stocks and to buy oil stocks instead, or gold stocks, or value stocks abroad. But it turned out that my warnings were right, and so I scored some points with my clients and prospects for having gotten them out of the market, or even if they didn't listen to me, they remembered what I said, and so I had some credibility. And I hooked up with a number of newsletter writers, and I was getting a lot of referrals, and so my business was growing and started hiring people. But then I became a critic of the Fed, more specifically in the years leading up to the '08 financial crisis, because I understood how the Fed's monetary policy was distorting the economy and inflating a housing bubble, and I knew it was going to be a disaster when this thing burst. So I was writing about it, warning about it. Eventually started going on, CNBC and other shows, talking about these problems, and people would say, well, who is this guy? This is ridiculous. CNBC started calling me Dr. Doom because I was talking about all these negative things that were going to happen. And, of course, they happened. And, it's going to get even worse, too. I mean, the bad things, all the bad things haven't happened yet. There's some really bad things that are still coming. But along the process, I built up a good following. I built my brokerage business up, and my precious metals company I launched, and now I got my offshore bank. And so I've got a lot of businesses that, have evolved, over the years from that. It all started just, me working by myself, in my one-bedroom apartment.
Yeah, and what's interesting, Peter, is that the first Peter Schiff was Right video, which basically chronicled, your adventures on all of these financial networks, warning about basically the housing bubble, particularly the housing bubble. Mm-hmm. That video could have been, if the technology was there, that could have been Peter Schiff was Right Part 2, because the Peter Schiff was Right on the .com bubble was kind of off the record. Like if I look back at when you first appeared.
I wrote some stuff. I wrote some articles about it, but yeah, there really wasn't, a YouTube, and I wasn't doing TV. So the warnings that I gave about the .com bubble were mainly private warnings that I gave to people at the other end of the phone, where I was talking to people. I did write an interesting article, which I think is still posted on my website, as a newsletter that was mailed out in about 2000 or 1999. But it was mostly just me on the phone constantly cold calling people, telling people that this thing is going to be a disaster, that these stocks are all going to crash, they're going to go bankrupt, this is insane. And, I was doing that in 98 and 99, and, for a while, everybody was making fun of me because everybody was getting rich but me, because all the stocks that I was telling people to sell just kept going up. They'd double again, and but yeah, eventually they collapsed, and most people gave back all their winnings. I mean, there were some people that left the casino with profits, but most of the people that I talked to that didn't follow my advice, on the way up, they didn't sell. They never sold, and they wrote it all the way down, and they ended up losing money. Meanwhile, the stocks that I was buying in 1998 and 99 went up a lot, and so I ended up making a lot of money, whereas the people that were making money early on ended up giving it back. And so, it was like the turtle winning the race. I stuck to my guns, and I invested on the fundamentals. And, I ended up making a lot of money, whereas the people that got suckered in, ended up losing a lot of money. They had a lot of paper profits, but it all vanished. In fact, one of the things I used to say to people was, look, all you're going to have to show for this mania is the memory of the profits that you never took. And I turned out to be right.
One thing that you do extremely well, I find, is selling, and particularly closing. And I remember in the early years when you had your show, before the show you have now, the Wall Street Unspun, you would never give up an opportunity to sell. Can you talk to me a little bit about selling and what's important to know about it and how to be good at it?
Well, I mean, that's, a long discussion of sales. I mean, but I mean, a lot of jobs are sales jobs. I mean, we're in financial services, and of course, it's still sales, right? I mean, people are buying our services or investing money with us. But generally, you need to be persistent if you want a career in sales. You need to be able to be aggressive, and you have to be able to take rejection. And, you can't just give up easily, because a lot of sales that you make, there's a lot of effort involved in closing that sale. You just can't say, well, do you want to buy this? And they say no, and then you say, okay, thank you, and then, move on. You might have to get, a lot of no's before you get your yes. So, but there's a lot to sales, and not a lot of people can do it. But the people who are successful in sales can make a lot of money. And, you don't have to go to college. I mean, most of the professions where people are selling, you don't have to go to college. And they don't really teach you how to sell in college either. There's no real, you can major in marketing or stuff like that. But, good salesmen aren't going to be, you're not going to be, college isn't going to turn out a good salesman.
Where can someone go?
You're just going to, you're just going to learn that on the job. I mean, some of the earliest things I did when I was young, I had jobs, I sold cable TV subscriptions door to door. I sold shoes. You know, I had jobs as a kid in sales. And that's how you sell. Like, you know, when I was a shoe salesman, what would I do as a shoe salesman? A woman comes into the store and she wants to see a pair of shoes. I didn't just bring her out the pair of shoes she wants. I brought her out another pair. And I brought, you know, things that she might like. You know, and then you try to get her to buy 2 or 3 pairs because I was on commission, right? You know, I wanted to sell as many pairs of shoes as I could. But you got to be aggressive. You know, you got to just get out there, and you got to give somebody a reason to buy. But you know, these are things that you learn just by being out there. I used to sell when I sold these cable TV subscriptions. I was the best salesman. I was doing it part time. There were guys that were there, you know, full time job, guys that had families, and I was out earning them in my spare time. Because when I first got my job, I decided to only sell annual subscriptions because there was a bigger commission. So people would call up and they'd want to subscribe to the channel, and I would say, okay, but why don't you take a year? And I would just sell the yearly subscriptions, and almost everybody that I would get them to buy a whole year up front. Nobody else was doing that, you know. But I realized, well, I can make more money if I get this yearly subscription because they would pay up front, and I would convince them, why pay every month? I showed them how it was an investment because I said, look, if you pay it every month, and I said, look, if you just pay it up front, this is your return on your investment because this is what you're saving, and I would, you know, relate it to what they would do if they had to make an investment. And if you canceled early, you got a prorate refund. So it was like a can't-lose investment. So I was kind of selling cable TV subscriptions as if they were an investment and telling people, look, this is the best return you're ever going to see. Just buy it up front for the year. And I was making more money, you know, because I just try to figure out how I can sell this and make more money than the other people that were doing it.
Peter, I feel like I have to bring this up because it was such a spectacular memory for me. This is back in the Wall Street Unspun days when you were doing your show, and you had just published your book, your first book, Crash Proof. And a gentleman called up, and you always pitch the book during the call, you know, open an account, buy the book and whatnot. A gentleman called up one time, and you did your usual thing, you know, why don't you buy my book? And this is what happened. I'm not making this up. He said, well, actually, I'm blind. Mm-hmm. And there was just the slightest pause, but then you went on, well, can't you buy it for a friend? I mean, you were literally selling a book to a blind man.
Well, I mean, now my books are in audio form, so if just being blind is no excuse. They can get the audio book. That
was the topic of discussion, actually. He was asking you, like, hey, when are you going to come up with an audio book? And he said, well, can't you just buy this book and have a friend read it to you? It was just incredible. I don't know if you remember that. No, I don't remember it, but we have audio books now, so that would be my quick response is get the audio book. Okay, and the last question, literally, a guy who's like you, who's started a startup business, is working out of his apartment, what advice can you give him, general advice, about what the hardships he's going to face and what it's going to take that little startup, one person in the apartment business to something more substantial?
Well, you know, it's certainly a lot more difficult than it needs to be because the government in the United States makes it very difficult for people to start and grow businesses, and that's unfortunate. And it also makes it very risky to hire people to help you because as you become an employer, then you find that you're subjected to all sorts of other requirements and costs that you might avoid if you didn't hire people. And the fewer people you hire, the better in that respect, because some of the laws only apply to you as you hire 5 employees or more, or 10 or 20 or whatever the threshold is. But you got to just be persistent. You got to work hard. You got to be prepared. I didn't make any money for the first few years I was on my own. I mean, I was mainly just trying to break even, just try to cover my overhead. So you know, it's rough in the beginning, but there's a good payoff. But the payoff's not guaranteed. You know, a lot of businesses fail. Sometimes your first business might not succeed, and you know, mine didn't. My first entrepreneurial effort was a small partnership commodity business, and it didn't really go anywhere. So, you know, I left that business and went into stock brokerage. But then the Europe Pacific Capital, that succeeded. But it took a while, you know.
Right, so persistence.
So you got to be persistent. You got to work hard, you know. But, you know, if you're good at, and try to find a business that you're good at and try to find something that you like doing. Because if you're going to spend 12, 14 hours a day doing something, it's better to like it. Enjoy what you're doing so it's not as laborious for you, and you'll be more likely to succeed if you can figure out, what it is you enjoy, what it is you're good at, and hopefully, it's the same thing, and then pursue a business in that area.
Great advice. Peter, thanks so much for coming on. So Europac.net is the website for the brokerage. There's SchiffRadio.com also for the radio show.
Yep. And Europac, SchiffGOLD is for my gold company, SchiffGOLD. And if you happen to reside outside the United States, EuropacBank.com for my offshore bank.
That's offshore banking. Thank you so much, Peter.